Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the Motorcraft T-Bird Pro Stock. It's a 125 scale Revell, model kit number 85-4098. Now this kit was re-released, has a copyright on the chassis of 1988, and it looks exactly like the original. It's a skill level 2 kit for the intermediate builder with 99 parts molded in white, chrome, clear red with vinyl tires and a new high quality decal sheet. So it also features a detailed Boss 494 cubic inch drag racing engine, complete roll cage, a racing chassis, a removable hood and body. Now the assembly is pretty straightforward with a typical motor chassis interior and then the body, and the detail is nice. It could be wired for even more detail. The roll cage builds up in sections and the interior is installed prior to finishing the cage, making the paint work a little more difficult there. But the body can be assembled prior to painting, but it has to be a two-tone as the decals do not have white side stripes on them. Overall, when you're done, it's about 8 3/4 inches long, 3 inches wide, and 2 inches high. Now, Bob Glidden, let's talk about him. He drove the Motorcraft T-Bird, and he had won 85 NHRA national events and holds 10 Pro Stock championships, including 5 in a row starting in 1985. He's one of the winningest drivers ever to be on the track. This kit was last released in 2013, and by now the decals may start getting brittle in your kits, so pay particular attention to those. I strongly suggest you use some decal setting solution and use plenty of warm water and let those soak well before you try and install them. Construction starts with the motor, and some assembly can be done before paint, so assemble the block halves and then add the heads, and then paint this unit aluminum with a flat black bell housing. The starter is black, and paint the valley cover steel colored. The intake is aluminum and the carbs are copperish. Now the distributor cap is black with a steel shaft, and the oil filter is gold with aluminum mounts. The valve covers are transparent red and the fan is gold. The belts are flat black and the aluminum pulleys and accessories are aluminum also. The front mount is steel with an aluminum water pump. Continue assembly by adding the valve covers to the heads. Then add the valley cover, the intake, and the carbs to the top of the motor, and add the distributor into place. Add the oil filter, and then the motor front is mounted and the belts are attached to it, and the fan is added last. The way this model is constructed, with the interior being added and then the cage, I decided that I would paint the chassis black and do that before any assembly. So this review will have most of the parts painted prior to assembly, but I'll call out the colors as we go along. Some of the older molding technology is showing through on this kit, and you'll note here that for a contest quality you would need to remove these pin marks, the ejector pin marks from the chassis, and the best way is with a sharp razor and some sandpaper to sand it smooth. Grab these parts and we'll start the chassis assembly with the shifter and the pedals. The pedals are black with steel rods and the shift knobs are black. Install the pedals onto the floor, and then the shifters are placed in the hole in the transmission hump. Now line up the shift rod to the shifter. Now install that assembly into the holes that are marked for receiving that in the transmission hump. Assemble the dash, then the tack on top of the dash there, and the firewall and electric box on the firewall prior to painting the unit black. The steering wheel is black with steel spokes, and the column is aluminum. Decals 10, 11, and 12 are instrument dials on the dashboard. Install the steering wheel into place on the dash, and then the whole unit gets installed onto the chassis pan. Find these pieces and start the roll cage, and it's painted black with flat black roll pads. And then the driver wall attaches to the chassis floor and the back brace to the side. Just as a note, when I say black without saying flat black, that usually means a satin black or a semi-gloss black. Get out the seats and clean the flash up around the edges. And then they are installed next, so paint the center red with a flat black seat and install both seats into place. Paint these cage parts black, then install the passenger's wall and the front brace the same as the driver's side. The trunk area gets assembled now, so paint all these parts black, and on the battery, paint the post steel with one red wire, and on the fuel cell, cover the cover and the pumps are aluminum color. Now install in this order. Add the batteries to each side, add the fuel cell and the rear tank, then add the X brace from the rear brace to the floor, and add the top brace from the rear brace to the fuel cell. Now add the rear deck panel. Locate these parts to assemble the front frame and paint all the parts black. Now the tie rod boots are flat black, and so are the springs with some steel, and the spindle tip is aluminum. Install them like this. Add the tie rod in place on the frame, install the spindles and the top frame rails, and then add the steering linkage to the firewall and to the tie rod, or from the firewall to the tie rod, and then I use some super glue on the spindles and the frame for strength, as the weight of the tires can put a little undue pressure on the overall front end, so I would recommend you use super glue there. For a little detail, I dry brushed the spindle and the spring coils here with some steel color to highlight them. Next we can install the motor. The transmission mounts sit on the lower frame, and the front mount sits at the side frames holding the motor into place. Get these parts out of the kit now and we'll install the radiator. The radiator, the main shroud, and the fan are all semi-gloss black, and the hose is black with transparent red attachments. Now assemble the radiator to the main shroud and the fan shroud to the main shroud. Now attach this unit in place on the front frame. The hoses, they glue to the heads and the radiator, and there's really no positive attachment point, so you just have to locate them where they would seem to work or fit best. Clean up the flash around the parting lines for the headers, as you see here. Get those out of the kit. And then we are going to assemble the headers and then paint them flat black and install them in place onto the heads through the frame rails. We'll move along to the rear suspension. Now paint the drive shaft steel and the frame braces black. The wheelie bars are aluminum with black wheels, and now assemble the differential and the axle and paint it gold. The springs are aluminum, the wheelie bar supports are steel colored, and insert the drive shaft into the transmission and install the frame brace. Then insert the axle into the wheelie bars and add the crossbars at the wheels. Now add the panhard rod from each wheelie bar, and that's where they mount. So install the wheelie bar onto the chassis and then add the springs from the chassis to the wheelie bar. The front tire and wheel parts, and the wheels need to be made look used and more realistic, so there's a film on these tires that kind of needs to be scrubbed off. I use a 220 grit sandpaper then to roll the tread while pressing it to the paper, and then insert the wheel back and the wheel front into the tire and glue them against each other. The rear wheels are next, and the wheel needs to be made more realistic, so again you're going to want to scrub that film off of there and use some like 220 grit sandpaper on a flat surface, and then roll the tread area and press it onto the paper to scuff up that tread area. Now paint the wheel backs aluminum and use some super glue to assemble the tire backside into the tire, and then insert the wheel backs and the wheel fronts into the tire and glue them to each other. Now you can install the front and rear tires into place, but be careful. The spindles are pretty fragile, so back them up, grab a hold of them on the back side, and then push them carefully straight on until they snap into place. You can do the same thing, of course, with the back wheels, but just make sure that you give it some stability before you push them on in order to keep from breaking the spindles. Now your car is starting to take place, and here's a photo from the top of what we'll call the rolling chassis. We also can show you a photo of the bottom here, and look at those massive slicks. This is really going to be a mover, and I think she's coming along well at this point. Just for some perspective, look how much taller the rear tires are to the fronts. The whole tire in front doesn't come up to the rim on the rear wheels, but your rolling chassis is ready and the stance looks pretty aggressive. Get the pieces out to assemble the body, as it can be put together prior to paintwork. Now attach the front and rear fenders to the body and assemble the snorkel and attach that to the hood. Now add the spoiler to the trunk. And there are some mold lines and some glue lines that will need to be cleaned up before you paint. So go ahead and use some 600 to 800 grit paper and clean those up along with the parting lines that you may find. When you assemble the snorkel, of course, there's going to be a mold line, a seam there, where the two parts go together. So after the glue has dried, file that off and smooth that out. You may need some putty too to clean that up and get a nice smooth finish. So wet sand the parts here with an 800 to 1000 grit sandpaper, wet or dry, and then clean them off with some soapy water and rinse them and let them air dry completely. Next, use a good quality primer and coat both the inside and the outside of the body and all the parts. Then wet sand the primer, look for more blemishes, apply putty and fix as necessary. And then once dry, paint white on the rear half of the body so that you can tape off the stripe. You can see here I used some blue fine line tape for the stripes. It's made out of vinyl and it conforms pretty well to the contours. And you can put it into creases with a toothpick or a pencil. It gives me a good crisp edge for the stripe. So then I filled in the main areas there with some low tack tape, and once it's in place I can paint the second color. Always start light to dark. The darker colors cover the lighter colors easier. So for painting this I used a GM white and a GM Victory red for the colors. It's a real close match to the decal color. Now we can decal the body, and the decals here are large, some of them, so I strongly suggest you use some decal setting solution to help those conform to the contours. Use plenty of warm water and let them soak off about 30 seconds and then set for about a minute before you try to move them and glide them onto your body. Use plenty of fluids, warm water and setting solution to put those into place. Then kind of squeeze them out with a soft cloth to get the air bubbles and trapped water bubbles out from underneath. Once that's done, you can let those dry overnight and add a clear coat to seal them into place. Now you can add the windows to the body using some white glue, and then install the decals onto the window glass as you see here and in the instructions. We'll add the front lights now. The corner lens is painted turn signal yellow, and use some white glue to attach the lenses to the bezels there, and then this whole assembly can be installed into the bumper. And remember to scrape off any chrome plating as well as paint to get a good bond. These parts in the kit, and we'll finish up the back end. The backup lights are silver on the inside and installed into the tail light. Now install this into place in the rear bumper. The chute mount is red and the chute is black. Now add the chute to the mount and install it onto the rear end. There are 4 hydraulic shocks to be mounted on the spoiler to the bumper. And then the spoiler has notches, but the bumper has no mounting points. You just have to eye it up and glue it into position. We're getting near the end of our build, and you'll need to finish up some details like these chrome oil breather caps. So locate those in the kit and trim them off, and if needed add a little silver touch up there, and then install those onto the motor at the back end of the valve covers. The final step in our main construction is to now we can slide the body onto the chassis. It'll stay there without glue. Just carefully spread the sides of the car and slide it down over the chassis and firewall. Now the car is complete. And here is the front and the rear of the finished build. As you can see, we're done with our construction, and she looks terrific. There won't be many parts left. There'll be some extra decals of the lockdowns and a grill that goes to a different version of this kit. Just throw them into the parts bin for later use. Well, there you have it. Aside from the issue with the snorkel having the seam running down the middle of it, there were really no issues with the kit. There were no major warpage. There were some ejector pin marks on the bottom that you'd have to deal with if you're building a contest model, but everything else fit together very well. There were no construction issues whatsoever. The difficult part, of course, is that two-tone paint job, but if you do a good job with that, look what you get when you're done. Overall, it's a great build, and those awesome rear tires have really set the thing off, and I think that this is a great looking kit, and if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you like this premium step-by-step model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. But you can find us on Facebook and at our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks!